Okay, my name is Raven Heavy Runner, and I'm Blackfeet from Browning, Montana. My Blackfeet name is Estoyokatsi, which means that person that sees in both directions. It's a two-spirit name, and was given to me by one of my teachers, Matt Darush, or Seizes the Pipe. And I was asked to speak a little bit about two-spirit people. Some of them kind of categorize them with the LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender identities. And it's very similar, but it's a little bit different in some ways. We believe as Native people that the two spirit role that many tribes had were institutionalized within their tribes. By that, that meant that those particular individuals did certain roles within their communities. Traditionally, long time ago, some of the two spirit people would, prepare the people who had passed on, because there were so many taboos around death, and a lot of tribes believed because they epitomized both the male and the female, that they also kind of transposed over to those that also were conduits between those that were on the other side and those that were here, or the spirit world and the physical world. And so, having that identifier, a lot of people felt that it was probably best that two spirit people would prepare those for funerals. Um, and so that's one of the roles that they played within some tribes. Others were that these individuals were really great at understanding what the issues were within their tribe. And for some of the tribes, they wanted to have their two spirit people there as mediators if there were to be any type of treaties going on. And some tribes would not even go forward unless they had their two spirit contingent there to be able to see whether or not this was a good treaty or not. Other jobs that they had taken on traditionally were those that cared for the orphans, and they would adopt children because they didn't have their own, and they would raise them. Others had taken on the role of medicine people, and they would go and they would take care of their people by using herbs and being able to bandage them up. And for those tribes, a lot of times they would take two spirit people with them during war parties. And the reason why they would do that was there was some prohibition of women going on war parties because they would have their monthly cycle. And not to say that was a bad thing, but it just created a lot of power. And there was a lot of power within that ability to create another life. And sometimes it would play havoc on the power that men had. And so, just to make sure that that didn't interfere with what their purpose was in going out and protecting their territory, they would bring two spirit individuals with them, because those two spirits would sometimes be the ones that would keep camp, and they would cook and make sure that they, that they had food when they came back from their warring excursions. And the fact that a lot of these two spirit male born but living as female two spirit people, because they didn't menstruate, they felt a little bit safer around that as far as their own power, their own medicine. And so there was a lot of different roles that two spirit people played traditionally. And what had stopped a lot of that with a lot of roles within the Native community was the boarding school experience. Because, of course, non-Indigenous societies didn't look on these roles in the way that Indigenous people did. So when these young children were getting brought to boarding schools, if they were being raised as two-spirit people, a lot of times they would not be allowed to continue in that way, and they would have to wear clothing appropriate to the sex that they were born as, and not the way that the spirit world or creator had wanted them to live as an adult. And so that created a lot of havoc for two spirit people and their communities, because this had an effect in a lot of ways on our indigenous people. Two Spirit people had added to the economic domain of our indigenous communities, our spiritual domain, our psychological domain, our social domain, and as they moved through the world after colonization happened, a lot of Two Spirit people didn't know who they were supposed to be because the boarding school didn't teach that, and they didn't also pass that information off to the people who would become our parents who had gone through boarding school. So when these roles came out, the only thing that they had to look to model that after was the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community within the mainstream society. So that didn't quite fit for indigenous people because we had specific roles that were tied not only to our society, but our own spirituality. A lot of times, Two Spirit people felt like this was a spiritual role as well, and any role that we played within indigenous societies. People would go and they would pray for power to be able to live a good life and go and do their vision quest and do Sundance and say, what am I supposed to do in life to help our people? For Two Spirit people, that was something that was similar. Some people would go off and the creator or the spirits would tell them, hey, this is how, if you want to gain power, this is the way that you are to live. And so if you read some of the old archival information on Two Spirit people, a lot of times they talk about how this was something that the creator had given to them as a role, and that's where their power came from. So what's happening today is we as Two Spirit people are reconnecting both with those roles and with the past, and trying to bring those roles that helped our people a long time ago back into our indigenous communities today. And there are a lot of people who are doing that. I mean, I've met in my time understanding who I was as a Two Spirit person over these last 30 years. I've met Two Spirit people who have fulfilled a lot of those roles. One of them being a friend of mine who worked for the state of Washington, but he would go in and negotiate these contracts with the tribes on how they could allocate money to be able to fund their services. And he, as a Native person, felt like it was really important to make sure that they got the best out of these negotiations, which was very. As I was talking with him, I'm like, do you realize that that is a Two Spirit role that you're playing? And I think that those of us that are in these helping fields, be they teachers, social workers, nurses, doctors, people who are taking care of children who are in the foster care system, those are roles that are roles that we took on traditionally that kind of transpose themselves from what our history was to where we are today. One of the things that was kind of important, and I think that is still important, there's a lot of tribes that still have rites of passage. And those rites of passage would be where, maybe a young man or a young woman or a young Two Spirit person would come before the whole community, and they would have a ceremony, and they would say, all right, this person has, done all the things that a young man is supposed to do, and now it's time for him to get his new name as an adult. All the people would stand out there, and that young man would come out before them to have the witnesses of the community see that he is now taking on the responsibility of a young man. He would get a new name, and everybody would come up and introduce themselves to this person with their new name. And they would be given those rights that go along with now being an adult. Now they can stay up past 10 or whatever it is, and it'd be the same for these young women, where they would know what their responsibilities are that go along with these rights as now adults within our community. And I've been to at least 2 rites of passage ceremonies for Two Spirit people where they were given a new name, and they were told people, these are the responsibilities that you have as a two-spirit person to live a good life, to help your community, to make sure that the role that you are playing is done in the best way possible. Um, and I just recently got a message, actually, it was just yesterday, from a doctor friend of mine, and she is a Chippewa woman that I met when I was in Seattle. And she said, my niece just came out, and I want to be able to do something special for her. And she wants to learn about who she is as a two-spirit person. And she's doing a presentation for her class in school, in high school. She's a freshman, and she's very proud of who she is, and she wants to do this in a good way. And one of the things that I wanted to convey to her aunt was, you know, um, you guys need to have a good ceremony for her. You know, you guys are blessed. You guys have a two-spirit person, another two-spirit person within your family. And some of the tribes traditionally believed that if you had two-spirit people within your family, that you were blessed. And so that's one of the things that I wanted to convey to her, as well as that young two-spirit woman who is now coming into this role as a two-spirit person. So a lot of times, or at least I would say in the last 50 years or so, a lot of young two-spirit people didn't understand who they were, and they left their communities because of colonization and the bullying that they received from those that had gone through the boarding school experience. Not to say that it's any fault of their own, because they were forced to go into those in a lot of situations, or they were compelled because their family didn't have the means to be able to care for their children the way they did a long time ago. We didn't have the land resources. We didn't have the food available to us. Now we had to rely on commodities, and so there was a lot of reasons why there was that disconnect. But my hope is now that we start connecting. When I first got back into the Two-Spirit community, or when I first came into the Two-Spirit community, one of the Two-Spirit elders had talked with some of her teachers, and what her teacher had said was, until the Two-Spirit people get accepted and get brought back into the circle, true healing within our indigenous communities is not going to happen. So if the work that you do as an ally, as somebody who is a part of a Native community, if you're really working toward healing your community, part of that healing process has to be acceptance of our Two-Spirit people. There are some differences between the LGBTQ people and Two-Spirit people, especially on this continent. One of them is that we were here first as Indigenous people. So I always implore those LGBTQ organizations who want to work with Two-Spirit people, that they need to put that identifier in the beginning, because we're the first peoples. But also the other differences was our roles as Two-Spirit people were institutionalized. We were a part of our community. Our community was the one that named us, that gave us these names, that said, these are the roles that you play. So we are not here specifically for the non-Indigenous people. We're here for our people. These roles that we were given to help our people were for our people. And so we're here for you all. Just want you all to know that. And so, but part of that is acknowledging those roles in a respectful way. So I want to thank you for this opportunity to be able to convey that to you, and it's my hope that that you take this in a good way. And thank you for all the work that you do within our Indigenous communities in general, but also the part of accepting who we are as Two-Spirit people.
Thank you, Raven. I appreciate your interview and giving the opportunity to explain more, because I didn't know myself till now about the LGBT and then the Two-Spirit, the difference. So I just learned something myself today. And I appreciate the work you do, and also being an advocate, for the society, and knowing that we're here, as a community, to accept everyone as who they are, and the choices that we make, just supporting one another.
Yes.
So I appreciate everything, and thank you.